I was only 17 at the time, and I've replayed this night more than I'd like to admit. I'm not telling it because it's dramatic. I'm telling it because, for a long time, I didn't believe how close I was to being part of something worse. I grew up in a small city where nothing really happened. I was a decent student, no criminal record, no history of violence. My parents were strict in a quiet way, the kind that assumed I'd follow rules without being watched. I usually did. My girlfriend at the time, Emily, was the opposite. Curious, restless, always wanting to push into places we weren't supposed to be. I'm explaining this because it matters later. We weren't thrill seekers in the sense of drugs or fighting. We didn't drink. We didn't steal. What we liked was empty places. Closed malls, old factories, buildings that had been forgotten but still standing. There was something about seeing a place frozen in time that felt personal, like you were the only one allowed to remember it existed. By 17, we'd been doing this for a while without incident. That night, we drove out to an abandoned theme park on the edge of town. It had shut down years earlier after a lawsuit and a series of failed owners. The fences were broken in multiple places. Locals knew about it, but no one bothered guarding it anymore. The park was spread out and uneven. A rusted roller coaster frame dominated the skyline. There were food stalls with their shutters half collapsed. The funhouse was a concrete structure with no windows and one main entrance. We parked about half a mile away and walked an access road the rest of the way. Looking back, it's kind of dumb to think at the time we thought we were being safe. We wore masks for the mold and dust, and even carried mace and tasers in case we ran into serious danger. It was quiet in the way large, empty places normally are. Just the wind whistling through the decaying structures, our footsteps, and the occasional creak of metal cooling. We were near the funhouse when we heard it. A woman screamed. It wasn't distant enough to be ambiguous. It wasn't an echo or a mechanical noise. It was sharp, strained, and cut off too suddenly. Emily froze and immediately grabbed my arm. She whispered something that meant she thought it was time to leave. But stupid me. I'm the kind of guy that has to play hero. I told her to stay back near the food stalls where there was light from the moon. I told myself I'd just look, just to see what was going on. The screaming didn't continue. That scared me more than if it had. I walked along the side of the funhouse, staying close to the wall. There was a service corridor that wrapped around the building, partially lit by a broken overhead fixture flickering on and off. I could smell something metallic mixed with rot, like wet iron. When I reached the corner, I leaned out just enough to look. There was a man about 20 feet away, hunched over something on the ground. At first, my brain refused to label it. Then I recognized the shape of a person lying still. Long hair, a bare arm at an unnatural angle. The man turned his head. I know this because his eyes locked onto mine immediately. No confusion, no delay, just direct eye contact. He didn't say anything. He didn't rush me. He just stood up slowly, like he'd been expecting someone to come around that corner. That's when I ran. I didn't shout, I didn't try to help. I turned and sprinted back the way I came, my heart pounding so hard it made my vision blur. When I got back to Emily, I grabbed her hand and told her we had to leave, now. She tried to ask questions. I didn't answer. I looked over my shoulder, and that's when I saw the man sprinting towards us. I seriously thought we were going to die. By some miracle, we managed to make it to an iron-barred fence that separated the park from a highway. It was a scramble, but I somehow managed to help Emily over the top. Nothing could have prepared me for what came next. Before I had time to get over the fence myself, I was pushed hard against the bars. My head smashed against it, and when I hit the floor, I could feel the blood running down the side of my temple. The man was standing over me now. Before I really had time to process what was happening, I had taken the mace and sprayed it directly into his face. The wind carried enough of it down to make me choke, but I didn't hesitate. I scrambled to my feet and scaled the fence while the man tried to wipe his eyes clean. Me and Emily didn't stop running until we reached the car. We drove straight to a gas station and called the police. I told them there was someone injured at the abandoned theme park. I didn't mention breaking in. I didn't mention what I saw clearly. I said I thought someone might be hurt. 2 days later, an officer came to my house with my parents present. They asked me to describe exactly where I'd been standing, what I saw, and how long I was there. They showed me a photo taken by a forensic team. It was the same corridor, same flickering light, same corner. They told me a woman had been found dead there. No ID at first. Cause of death wasn't shared with me. The police didn't charge me with trespassing. They said my call likely sped up the response. They asked if I could identify the man. I couldn't. I never saw his face clearly enough. Just the shape, the posture, the way he looked at me. Emily stopped going out at night after that. We broke up a few months later for unrelated reasons. We never talked about the park again. I stopped exploring abandoned places completely. Sometimes I think about that moment of eye contact, how calm he was, how unafraid. If I had taken one more step forward instead of running, I don't know what would have happened. I don't think he was done there yet. I still avoid that side of town, and I don't think I'll ever forget that night.
We were young, reckless, and convinced nothing bad ever really happened to people like us. That belief lasted right up until the moment a stranger started sprinting toward us in the middle of an abandoned amusement park, screaming something that didn't sound like words. I'm not proud of how I handled it. I'm just explaining what happened. I was 18, fresh out of high school, working part-time and coasting on the idea that consequences were always negotiable. My friend Darren had been my closest friend since middle school. He was louder than me, quicker to act, and always convinced he could talk his way out of anything. We were the kind of kids teachers warned others about. Not violent, not hardened, just careless. We drank too much, trespassed, tagged buildings we shouldn't have. No arrests, no real trouble. Every close call had reinforced the idea that luck was permanent. I'm describing this because if it had been anyone else with me that night, I don't think things would have escalated the way they did. The amusement park had been closed for about 3 years. Everyone in town knew it. Lawsuit, insurance issues, then total abandonment. The front gates were chained but bent open enough to slip through. Inside, the main lane ran straight down the center, lined with food stands and game booths. Rides branched off into darker areas. We went in just as the sun started going down. We had backpacks with spray paint, cheap beer, and gloves. No weapons, no masks. This wasn't supposed to be serious. We planned to tag one of the boarded-up arcades and leave before it got fully dark. We'd been inside maybe 45 minutes. We were drinking, laughing, climbing onto a closed carousel platform. The park was quiet except for us. No cars, no voices, no movement. It made us feel safe, knowing that nobody was out there. We were walking back toward the center lane when I noticed someone standing ahead of us, right in the middle of the path. At first, I thought it was a statue or a park prop we hadn't noticed before. Then it shifted. The figure was holding something close to his chest. I couldn't tell what. He was facing us, completely still. Darren laughed and said it was probably a homeless guy scavenging metal. The man started yelling. It didn't sound like English, or any language I recognized. It was loud, uneven, almost rhythmic, like he was repeating the same phrase over and over. Darren shouted back, insults, mocking. I told him to stop. That's when the man hit the ground with whatever he was holding. The object hit the pavement with a dull sound. It wasn't a bag. It wasn't clothes. It was a crowbar. The man leaned forward and started running. Not stumbling, not charging blindly, sprinting, fast, direct, eyes locked on us. We ran, immediately. I didn't look back at first. We cut left between 2 stalls and knocked over a trash bin. I could hear his footsteps behind us, heavy, closing distance. Darren tripped near the arcade entrance and dropped his backpack. I grabbed his arm and pulled him up. We burst through a maintenance door and slammed it shut behind us. Inside was pitch dark.
We hid, breathing through our shirts, listening. Footsteps outside, slow now, then scraping metal against concrete. For a brief moment, I felt like I could pass out sitting in that closet. I held my breath like I was several meters underwater, just praying to God that Darren didn't decide now was a good time to provoke the guy even further. It seemed like we had lost him because eventually the dragging metal and footsteps left, and we could hear screaming fading further into the distance. When he was far enough away that we felt safe, I finally inhaled. Darren laughed it off like any other time we just barely escaped imminent trouble. But I knew in that moment, there was still a chance we didn't make it out of the park that night. The fact that the man never stopped screaming made it fairly easy to avoid him, but Darren insisted on going back for his bag. We circled around thinking that the man was gone, but when we got to the backpack, the man was standing over it, smashing it to pieces with his crowbar. I convinced Darren the bag wasn't worth it, and we used a rear exit that opened into a wooded service road to get out. We didn't stop running until we reached my car. It was a story I kept to myself for the most part, but of course Darren had to share it with everyone, like we had been playing a video game and had defeated some big boss. I tried to laugh it off, but I've never gone near that place again. I guess it scared me straight in a way, because if that man had caught us, I know we were done for. A month later, Darren showed me a photo on his phone. It was taken on the same day we went out. It was random pictures we had been taking, but in one of them, in the shadows, you can clearly see the same man standing behind us. I don't know how long he had been following us, but that detail still creeps me out. I don't know what that man was doing there. I only know he didn't hesitate. If that door hadn't been unlocked, I think this story would have ended differently. I stopped pretending luck was permanent after that.
I was 19 when this happened, and I'm careful about how I describe it because nothing about that night felt dramatic while it was unfolding. It felt procedural, routine. That's what made it dangerous. I worked alone at an abandoned amusement park, and for a long time I believed the job's biggest risk was boredom. I was wrong, and the only reason I know that is because something interrupted my routine at exactly the wrong moment. I wasn't a security guard in the official sense. No badge, no uniform beyond a windbreaker with the park's old logo stitched on it. I'd been hired through a temp agency after the park shut down, mostly to keep an eye on the property while the owners dealt with insurance and lawsuits. They didn't want copper stolen. They didn't want graffiti. They wanted someone visible. I was a college dropout at the time, living at home, trying to save money. Nights worked for me. I liked quiet. I liked predictable tasks. I'd been on the job for about 6 weeks when this happened, long enough to feel comfortable and careless. I worked alone every shift. No partner, no camera feeds. Just a radio that connected to a dispatcher who covered multiple properties and a checklist I was supposed to fill out hourly. The amusement park had closed about 14 months earlier. Everything was still standing. Rides frozen mid-arc. Game booths sealed with metal shutters. Food stands locked but intact. The place felt preserved rather than abandoned, which I think gave me a false sense of safety. The park was laid out in a large loop. A main lane circled the perimeter, branching off into ride areas and service corridors. In the center was a concrete plaza with a dry fountain and a maintenance access hatch that led to underground utility tunnels. Most of the lighting was off at night, except for a few solar path lights and emergency fixtures near buildings. My routine never changed. I entered through the service gate at 7 p.m., walked the loop clockwise, checked locks, noted damage, radioed in at the top of each hour. 40 minutes per loop, same pace, same order. I'm describing this because someone else clearly noticed. About an hour into the shift, I saw something that didn't fit. One of the arcade buildings had its side door open. Not forced, just unlatched. I was sure it had been locked. I'd checked it myself the night before. I noted the time and radioed the dispatcher, then approached. Inside, nothing looked disturbed. No missing equipment, no trash, no graffiti. The air felt stale but not recently moved. When I stepped back outside, I heard footsteps.
Not echoing, not random, matching my pace. I stopped. The sound stopped. I called out, identified myself, and told whoever it was that the park was closed. No response. Just silence that felt intentional. I resumed walking toward the central plaza, keeping my flashlight on and my radio open. The footsteps followed again, always a few seconds behind, never close enough to pinpoint. As I crossed the plaza, my flashlight beam passed over the dry fountain basin. The metal lining caught the light and reflected something behind me. A person. Standing just beyond the path lights, partially obscured by the roller coaster supports. Adult male, average build, wearing dark clothes that blended into the background and a sort of masquerade mask. He was holding something rectangular against his chest. I turned fully and aimed the light at him. He didn't flinch. He raised the object slightly. It was a clipboard. He spoke calmly and said something like, "You missed one." Before I could respond, he stepped back into the darkness and disappeared between the ride supports. This matters later. When police reviewed the park's maintenance records, they found inspection-style checklists dated weeks after closure, filled out by hand. The format matched mine exactly. I radioed for the police immediately and moved toward the administration building, keeping the plaza in view. I told the dispatcher there was someone inside the park pretending to be staff. As I backed away, I heard the maintenance hatch in the plaza open. Metal scraping. Slow. Controlled. I watched the hatch lift from the inside. The man emerged, still holding the clipboard. He looked annoyed, like I'd disrupted his schedule. He didn't run. He didn't threaten me. He walked toward me at a steady pace. I told him to stop. He smiled slightly and whispered something. That's when I ran. I reached the administration building and locked myself inside, barricading the door with a desk. From the window, I saw him stop at the door, test the handle, and make a note on the clipboard. Then he walked away toward the tunnels. Police arrived 13 minutes later. They searched the park and the tunnels. They found the clipboard placed neatly on a bench near the fountain. Inside were pages of notes documenting my patrol times, route consistency, and comments like predictable and alone. No suspect was found. No charges filed. I quit the next day. The job posting vanished a week later. I still think about how long he'd been down there, using the tunnels, watching me repeat the same loop. If I hadn't noticed that unlocked door, I don't know when I would have realized I wasn't alone. I stopped taking night jobs after that. Predictability doesn't feel safe to me anymore.